remember, the Constitution is a living document, right? People need to understand. If it wasn't a living document, we could still justify slavery, right? Or we could say we don't have free speech. But then we had the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and those gave us the right to speak. And the First Amendment says, one part of the First Amendment says that Congress will pass no laws to bridge the freedom of speech. Political campaigning at a very deep level is a foundational ability for you to talk about whatever views you want. Political speech is particularly the most protected. Then the Fifth Amendment was passed, was for due process. And about 100 years ago, probably one of the most important amendments, as much as I would say as the First and Second Amendment, was the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment laid it bare that you cannot discriminate between citizens, okay? You cannot discriminate and prejudice between one class. In fact, you cannot have a two-class citizenry. That was the foundations of the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment, in many ways, overcame some of the issues having to do with the 11th Amendment, which says you cannot sue a government, a state official in federal court. It actually made caveats which people thought would never be you could allow. But each subsequent amendment can have significant ramifications on the previous amendment. So how does the Constitution change? It's three ways. One is Congress can vote to pass it to the states. The states can call a constitutional convention, or Supreme Court rulings can create precedents. Is that clear? So since Bowling versus Green, very, very important event that took place, the 14th Amendment was also applied at the federal level, which meant that not only can you not have a two-class tier of citizenship at the state level, but also at the federal level. So this is very important to understand. And since that amendment, 14th Amendment, and people need to do some studying, is that you will recognize there have been many, many Supreme Court rulings, precedent-setting rulings, which says that you cannot specifically discriminate between a naturalized citizen and a natural-born citizen. Okay, so that's a background. So it's unconstitutional if any state doesn't, or any state Secretary of State stops me from getting on the ballot. Now it gets even more interesting. In 2011, the FEC, which is the governing body, the agency which controls really elections, right? Election funding. They ruled in 2011 in an advisory opinion in the Hassan case in New Hampshire that a naturalized citizen can run for the office of president and raise money. Okay, period. So there is a set of provisions, right, predicates in the law, which clearly states that a court must, before they do a ruling, they must see if another agency already did a ruling. It's called agency deference. It's deferring to a subject matter expert. So last week, 2 weeks ago, I filed a federal declaratory relief lawsuit in court against Merrick Garland because we have a massive movement, except you and a few others who are covering us, because I believe you actually have regard for truth, and your organization does counter narrative, Christy, which I really appreciate. Joe Rogan doesn't. Joe Rogan is owned by multi-billion-dollar Spotify and Ari Emanuel. Neither does Russell Brand, who will suck up to anyone because a guy came out of nowhere. Same with Elon Musk. Elon Musk is part of the establishment, but we are going to give our viewership to independent journalists like you guys, because people need to recognize that when you look at the arc of the Constitution, that it is, and by the way, 20 years from now, people, after we make this even more clear, so we filed lawsuit against Merrick Garland. I'm doing by myself. Every time I do lawsuits myself, I win. When you bring these scumbag lawyers, they try to screw up the lawsuits. But we have filed a lawsuit in federal court in Washington, D.C., making it amply clear that we want Merrick Garland, we want the courts to direct Merrick Garland to tell all the secretaries of state, like whack them upside the head and get them up to speed, that if they attempt to ban me, stop me from getting on the ballot, that is a violation of the Constitution. What I'm doing is as powerful as what I did in the 2020 lawsuit, where we expose the fact that government has weaponized social media companies, but it is also going back to a very foundational principle of the Constitution. You cannot have a two-tier system of citizenry. And So we have now hundreds of thousands of volunteers on the ground. We're going to be the first independent candidate getting on the ballot on every state. We know they cheated me in Massachusetts on the 2020 Senate election. The Republicans did it, not the Democrats. Okay. Republican Party did it in Massachusetts. But it's going to be incredible because all of these citizens are going to learn the corruption of how the secretaries of states work if they attempt to stop us. But I've already filed that declaratory relief on behalf of the 22 million citizens, naturalized citizens in this country. That's one of our constituents, because if you're a citizen like me who was in the American Legion Jersey Boys State, which they only select 2 students. And by the way, I went to the high school. Chris Christie is also running, one of my other opponents, if he gets to be. But, I think it's really important people learn history. The Secretary of States, most of them, are dumb, and they don't learn any of this stuff. But it's time that American people understand the Constitution. You cannot discriminate. There's no 2 class of citizenry. If that's the case, I might as well just move back to India and support a caste system. That's the bottom line.
Right. I appreciate you addressing that, because I feel like a ton of people have just thrown that out and then dismissed it, listening any further.